This podcast is presented by the Prince George's County Memorial Library System.
Do we get to answer this question ourselves?
You can if you want. It will probably not get put in, but
okay.
Go for it.
I would just absolutely forget everyone important and what their titles are. It'd be very disrespectful.
That's fair.
For me, if I were in Ella Enchanted, the giveaway would be that I'm overweight.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I would just spill something immediately. I spill everything.
Something?
Because you're clumsy, not like the other girls.
Not like the other girls.
I'm not like other girls. I'm disgusting. It would be that.
That's going into the box.
You can slice that into her.
Hi, I'm Heather, and this is our podcast, These Books Made Me. Today we're going to be talking about Ella Enchanted by Gail, Carson, Levine. Friendly warning as always, this podcast contains spoilers. If you don't yet know who hates having hair in their soup, proceed with caution. We have two special guests with us this week. Could you introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name's Marisa. I'm a librarian in the North area, a big fan of technology, and a notorious chatterbox. So I'm looking forward to this.
I'm Teresa. I'm a librarian in our central area, and this is my second time on the podcast, so I'm excited.
So, Teresa, I'm going to shoot this to you here. What did this book mean to you, either growing up or, as becoming a librarian?
So I read this the first time when I was probably in elementary school. Fairy tale retellings were like my bread and butter. I devoured these. So this was probably one of the first ones of that sort of genre that I read. And it's definitely one that's like stuck around in my memory. Rereading it this time, like there's some places that are a bit either haven't aged well or maybe weren't like the strongest storytelling, but there's still a lot holds up. I'm holding the 20th edition or 20th anniversary edition in my hands. Like there's a reason it's still around and people are still reading it.
Yeah, I think anything that's fairy tale retellings, it just seems like we always love them. Yeah. Like I can remember growing up and watching Rocky and Bullwinkle's Fractured Fairy Tales. I loved it. So when I read this for the first time, I think I was 10 years old. And I remember that it just really sucked me in to the point where I think I still know the first line of the book. That fool of a fairy Lucinda did not intend to place a curse on me. She meant to bestow a gift. And that's just such a good opening. And it really stuck with me. My first impression upon rereading it was she's a lot older than I thought she was when I first read it. Because when I was reading through it, I thought she was like 11 or 12. And then she's 17? 16 going on 17?
At the end, yeah. It definitely reads a little bit younger. And it makes sense because it is like for a younger audience. This is in our juvenile collection.
Yeah.
But I honestly think she's that old canonically just so she can get married at the end. Like she feels like a younger character that younger readers can connect with.
Yeah, but also 16-year-olds getting married.
Oh, yeah. Fairy tale times.
We would like to go on the record and say that we do not condone that behavior.
So I think I'm the outlier here because I read this book as an adult. I did not read it as a child. And I read it in the context of being a mom of daughters. I did not retain a lot of this book, though this seems to be a theme for me that if I don't reread a book many, many times, much of it doesn't stick. Yeah, I don't know. I remember liking it the first time I read it. I'm not sure how well it holds up now. Again, like Teresa said, it's not a current book.
Yeah, definitely. Some sections upon rereading, I kind of sat here as an adult and went, okay, like I could feel myself physically cringing.
Maybe I can go ahead with our plot summary real quick and then we can dive in. At her birth, Ella of Frell received a foolish fairy's gift, the gift of obedience. Ella must obey any order, whether it's hopping on one foot for a day and a half or chopping off her own head. But strong-willed Ella does not accept her fate. Against a bold backdrop of princes, ogres, giants, wicked stepsisters, and fairy godmothers, Ella goes on a quest to break the curse forever.
And Marisa, I think you've got an author bio for us.
Yes, indeed I do. Gail Carson Levine was born and raised in New York City and born on September 17th, 1947. Her parents were David and Sylvia Carson, and Gail was the second of their two daughters. Both Gail and her sister grew up in a home that valued books and reading and encouraged creativity of all sorts. Gail grew up with the dream of becoming a painter, and writing as a career wasn't initially in her sights, although she participated in writing activities in high school. She also enjoyed acting and even started an acting troupe with her friends in high school that performed at local nursing homes. In college, initially Antioch and Yellow Spring, Ohio, then City College of New York, Levine majored in philosophy and after graduation took a job working to help welfare recipients at the New York State Department of Labor and Department of Social Services. In 1967, she married David Levine, a software developer, but himself also a creative person as a pianist and photographer. Gail Carson Levine would work for the New York Department of Labor and Social Services for close to 30 years. She says that she found the earlier work that involved directly helping people more rewarding to the administrative side that she came to later in her career. Levine would keep up her creative life, mostly through her painting, but by the late 1980s, she would come to realize that she was interested in a new career, that of a children's author. She endured nearly a decade of rejection before her first novel, Ella Enchanted, was published in 1997. The following year, it won the Newbery Medal. Levine has been writing children's and young adult books, many with fairy tale themes, ever since.
Let's dive right into the book. Start out with the $1 million question. How does this book hold up? Like Teresa mentioned, it's a little bit older. It was written in 97. How does this book work for us? That's kind of where I'm at.
You gotta explain that sound though, Marisa.
Like some of it aged like wine, some of it aged like milk. Especially, there was this constant theme of good people are small and petite. And Ella has the world's smallest feet. Did you know she actually needs help to walk? Oh, wait, she doesn't because she has the gift of obedience. And people who are bad or not entirely human are large. Like the first thing we hear about her like stepmom, which by the way, her name is Olga. Olga is like the classic villainous name. Like if you told me someone was named Olga and she wasn't the wicked stepmother, I'd be like, she's going to cause problems 2 chapters in. The first thing we hear is that she has like a kind of ugly face and she's overweight. And there's a part of me that reads this in 2022 and goes, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like that in general. I don't like that as someone who's chubby. It doesn't age well. It just doesn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of fat shaming in general in this book. Like you mentioned, the stepmother, but we also have pages and pages of Olive eating. And it's a very negative thing that's very telling about her character.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, she's depicted as gluttonous and greedy. She hoards money. She's slow and dim-witted and stupid. Hattie's also presented as large and not attractive, just like her mom. That I think basically the only character that's of size that's depicted in a positive way at all is Mandy. But even that, I feel like she's frequently very negative in terms of her descriptors of Mandy. It's almost like she's good in spite of looking frumpy and plump. And
I don't know if I read it as in spite of, but it definitely was like still playing into a trope of like the cozy, simple housemaid.
And that's so funny to me. It's like, oh, you're a wonderful person in spite of your hair, your teeth, your nose, your overall size, your body odor, and, you know, that extra toe that you have. Because Ella's whole thing is she's not like other girls. She's clumsy and sometimes talks out of turn.
Slides down banisters.
But it's interesting that when Ella does something outside of the norms, it's fine. But if someone of size does something, it's immediately considered bad and questionable. I don't want to live in that world. I don't want to be in that world.
There was one part at the end. This is not to dispute anything you said because you're both spot on, but there was one example of largeness in a positive light that I did appreciate at the very end in the description of the queen. I'm going to see if I can find it.
She has a broad face.
Yeah, a wide
for
face to accommodate a
broad
wide smile. And I thought that was a nice breath of fresh air in the midst of what's a very consistent targeting of appearance and associating certain traits with someone's character.
True.
I also just, during I guess this is fantasy, so clearly this isn't a real world or a real time period, but I think it is meant to echo sort of historical time periods. You can sort of place it by what's valued, the monarchy, the things they have at their disposal in terms of tools and such. And I have to say, I feel like it probably wouldn't have been a negative to have some meat on your bones then, because it would indicate that you were fed and that you were of means. And so that was a little bit odd to me as well, because I'm not sure that's consistent with the world that the author is building to depict eating and having an appetite as being like a negative thing.
Yeah. Like with Olive wanting a cake at every meal. Yeah, the nobility would totally have been doing that.
Well,
Sounds like a great time.
I do have a somewhat related question. Did we figure out exactly when and where Frell is supposed to be? I ask because we're talking about food, and one of my personal pet peeves is when you get like medieval, early modern, and there's potatoes.
And corn.
Like,
and turkey.
No.
Yeah.
Were there potatoes in this book? Because I feel like that tends to get kind of depicted as like the default peasant food.
It's not.
I don't know. The food is not well described in this book. We've had some other books where the authors have clearly taken a lot of pleasure in describing the decadence of certain foods. Really, the only foods that we get a whole lot of descriptor on are the things that Mandy makes that have some element of magic to them.
Unicorn hair.
The unicorn hair tonic. There's the one soup that is described, and I think that was carrot. She said she picked them at like their peak sweetness. Mandy's a cook. She's got Ella working in a kitchen with her, but there's not a whole lot of real descriptors about the food. It's just like she's mixing this for a cake, but what kind of a cake? So I'm not sure we've got a lot on the food, but I do just generally, I'm not sure what the time period was. I think I felt it was like maybe medieval. Teresa, I think you were thinking it was like Elizabethan times.
Well, there's one reference to Olive's, they call it her stomach roll. It's like she's hiding her coins in the stuffing of the stomach roll. And that was a piece that in Elizabethan times, it would be worn under the skirt to kind of hold it away from the body. But then later her ball gown is described as having like a large bow in the back, which I'm not an expert in historical costuming. I dabble, but I don't think that was a thing like in congruent style. So I'm pretty sure it's just generic fantasy. Like,
yeah.
I feel like this book is very impressionistic, where it's more about the feeling and the experience than it is about any material accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's why kids like it. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so enduring. You can get into this character's head and kind of see things from her perspective. And because Ella is, only a 16-year-old, she probably isn't going to notice all of these great details of what's around her. And it's written in a way that's very accessible.
Yeah. And
is it a bug? Is it a feature? I don't know.
And unless you're going like all in on the food, like the Redwall books do, most descriptions of food are going to be boring and not really super plot relevant.
Yeah, I think there's not a ton of world building in this book for as long as it is. This is not a super spare book as far as children's books go. It's, it's not like 100-page novella kind of thing. It's fairly substantial as a children's book. But most of the space is dedicated to what Ella's thinking or, her interactions. A lot of dialogue in this book, but not a ton of fleshing out of the worlds around her. We do get a ton of other languages that different beings in the world speak, or that a different part of the kingdom speaks. Beyond that, it didn't seem like she was super interested in like fleshing out the economy of this world or who's who in in the lords and ladies in monarchy, or what's actually happening at these balls or feasts. It's very broad strokes. It's like there's dancing, and then someone's going to sing a song. And like at finishing school, you're going to embroider some stuff, and then you're going to learn some languages. There's just not a lot of depth to the descriptions in the book. I feel like it's more character driven than world or plot driven.
I would have appreciated a little more context just because it's a fantasy. But I also think that's because I'm an adult now, and those things now matter to me as a reader. 10-year-old me didn't care.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say too. Like, I was fully engrossed in this book when I read it because I was in Ella's head with her, and that's what I enjoyed. I did not care. I would have enjoyed a map probably, since she travels. I always love a good map in a fantasy novel. But other than that, I was perfectly content as a child reader with the information she provided. It was generic fantasy. You could imagine the wonderful gowns everyone was wearing without having to read a couple pages of the descriptions.
I think in keeping with the generic fantasy bit, there are also some other really common tropes from children's literature that we see in here. Her mom dies, which we see.
Spoilers, her mom's dead.
Thanks. Sorry if you made it this far. Her mom is no longer with us. She dies very early on in the book. Orphaned children are sort of a staple of fairy tales and children's literature because it frees them up to have adventures. And then we also have the boarding school type of thing with her going to finishing school. So being sent away from home in this period of independence of some sort and like having to learn about yourself.
Well, I guess to some extent, the first thing I think of is if you're being sent away to a school to be educated in really anything, it could be manners, foreign languages, or underwater basket weaving for all I care. It's an indication of wealth and means. It makes sense why we have Olga, the gold digger, who wants to marry the widower and have access to those means.
Well, and her dad is completely financially obsessed to the point of being very dishonest and a pretty sketchy guy with his merchant career. But he's very fixated on monetary gain. And, he ships her off to boarding school even less because it's like a symbol of status and more because it improves her odds of landing a rich husband, which then improves his bank account.
Ella's connection to class is really interesting because like she spends so much time when she's young, and then when she gets back from school in the kitchens, just working alongside of the staff. But she's also a member of a family that has staff. And part of her whole, like, not like the other girls trope, I think, is related to class. That, like, the other girls that she's not like are rich and stuck up about it. So she feels some distance from that. But then when it comes down to it, and she's like being mistreated by her stepfamily, forced to live in the servants' quarters where it's so awful, she would never want to have to live there ever again, but she doesn't do a whole lot of reflecting on like how her friends have been living in servants' quarters.
Can we talk about
that? And then when she has the chance to sort of elevate everybody with her when she marries the prince, she just puts them in charge of other servants. She doesn't actually do anything to improve conditions.
Promoting you to like, servant supervisor.
Right.
She's like above the people who are obsessed with wealth because she just doesn't think about it, which means she doesn't do anything about the inequality it causes and is just complicit and marries the prince. It doesn't change anything.
Ella is not woke. We would like to go on record and say that she is not woke at all. It's so funny though, because she's doing all of this manual labor, and I feel like because
she learns nothing from it.
She's like, man, sucks to be a servant. Bye, guys, and then just walks away.
Right. There's never a moment where she's like, this is awful. My hands are bleeding from using lye on the floor. Maybe we shouldn't have servants using lye on the floor. It's just, nothing ever clicks for her.
She's like, they're fairies. It's okay.
This is bad for me.
I do think there is supposed to be a like, well, she's getting like the extra bad treatment because her step family doesn't like her. But again, like no examination of like someone would still have to do this job.
Yeah.
If it wasn't me.
Someone's scrubbing the floor,
Yeah.
even if it's not her.
Yeah.
I mean, the narrative pretty much says from, the wealthy standpoint, meaning, Olga and the stepsisters, the worst thing that we can possibly think of for you is to have you scrubbing the floors like all of these people
and working in the kitchen and
be seen by the nobility in your rags and covered with dirt.
Well, and it also is odd too because so the dirt thing, and I know this is part of it being a twist on the Cinderella story, and none of the other servants are filthy. Like, why?
She doesn't allow anyone to bathe her anymore, so she hasn't bathed herself.
They are professional servants. She's in there on an unpaid internship.
Like they describe her and she looks like a chimney sweep, and no one else in the book is described as being filthy.
Because they've been doing it for years. They know how to handle it.
Surely Mandy could use some small magic and just like freshen her up a bit.
Tidy up the face a little bit.
Nah.
When she's getting ready for the ball and she gets in a bathtub, she acts like she hasn't
had a bath
in this entire
ever.
time.
What is this magic you've done? Ma'am, it's soap.
It's that. It's just warm water and soap. Bringing up Mandy and her small magic, I think we need to talk about what small magic is and what big magic is. Because I will be honest, this bothered me almost as much as anything else in the book. And I do think the book is fun. And I think that I get why people enjoy reading this as a child. It's fun. It has some likable characters in it. But there's so many things in this book that just are not consistent. And the magic thing really gets me because the context is that Mandy is a fairy. And in this world, fairies seem to have fairly unlimited magical powers. They can do all manner of things, but they choose not to because big magic has ripple effects, right? So there's this whole notion of a butterfly effect that if you do something big, it changes everything going out. And I think that the example that Mandy initially gives to Ella is, no, I can't make it stop raining. Think about what would happen if I did that. And she says, oh, well, then someone's crops may not grow. Oh, it may cause a drought. She goes along with that and says, yes, that's exactly right. That would be big magic because it has all of these impacts. But this whole story basically kicks off because Ella's mom dies. And like while they are both sick, Mandy gives them a soup with unicorn hair in it, which Ella drinks, and it saves her life. The mother refuses to drink the unicorn hair because I guess she's too good to drink a hair in her soup and dies because of it. This seems like big life-saving magic seems big to me. So like the ripple effects of the mom dying are huge. They are the whole book. Yeah. Everything that happens essentially happens because of that catalyst of an event. And Mandy was like, no, but small magic, brewing a life-saving soup, that's fine. But I can't put this vase back together. After it breaks on the ground, I can just magic the pieces into the trash. Like, I just could not track the rules of magic in this world at all.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it maybe has to do with the number of people affected. That's the only logic I can find where it's like, okay, I can help one person. But if I do something that affects more people, then we have a problem. But then again, I'm pretty sure if you have an alive mom as opposed to a dead mom, that's going to have profound effects on several people.
And I think it would have actually impacted fewer people had she, so she lets her die after, even though she tries to save her. But then that ends up affecting either direction. That would affect the whole kingdom because the whole romance between Shar and Ella wouldn't have gone the way that it went if her mom hadn't died.
I've made some small justification for myself that only very weakly holds up, that it's because it was the mom's choice whether or not to drink it. Like Mandy made it available, but she didn't like touch her forehead and cure her. It's still a life-saving potion, but maybe that's how Mandy justified it in her mind. I don't know.
You couldn't tell her to make sure she, really
Yeah, just
appreciates
let
the
her know.
special sauce. Like, what?
Like, she could potentially save someone's life, but she can't give Ella a dang umbrella. Like, I was like, what
Yeah.
is this? The scale is very confusing to me.
There must be some backstory with the fairies because everyone except Lucinda is so traumatized, like so afraid of what will happen. I feel like there must have been
Yes.
like some dark stuff that went down a couple centuries ago that
Well,
everyone else has just kind of forgotten
I mean,
about.
Other than
fairies are indirectly
Lucinda-
murdering people in this book.
Well, they totally are. But everyone but Lucinda, of the fairies, seem to be beloved and they're invited to all of these
But
things.
they're also like living and cowering in fear and not telling anyone that they're fairies and hiding their small feet and like there's something that happened.
Yeah, the whole fairy thing is a little odd to me. But
Yeah.
then Lucinda's like poofing around, but she's like
and no one's bothered by
teleporting,
that.
and everyone's just like, "Oh, that's so cool, a fairy." So like,
I'm not
why
saying
are they in
current-
hiding?
Not saying current persecution. I mean like
Historical.
way back fairies were doing whatever they wanted. People got angry and tried to like wipe them all out or something and now the remaining fairies have taken a vow.
Is that why?
That's what I think.
Is that why obedience was a gift?
Oh. Although Lucinda doesn't seem to have a great sense of her.
Oh yeah,
shared
She has
community
very
trauma.
poor boundaries.
So I don't think the community trauma is what motivated the gift. But I don't know.
I
There's something
also
going
was
on.
confused by the gifts because I thought the book was early on establishing that Lucinda knew exactly what she was doing when she gave these gifts that weren't really gifts to people. But then at the end, that clearly wasn't the case because
She's fully clueless.
yeah, it just seems like she's oblivious.
Yeah.
But that was not how it read to me at the beginning, where
Really?
it seemed very like passive aggressive gifting. Where
I chose you to
have
hate
this
baby.
elephant.
which would have been maybe more interesting if there was some history with the fairies. Like,
Maybe.
I
Miss
don't
Levine,
know.
we're not saying the book is bad. We're just saying
No.
we need some context.
It's
Yeah.
a children's book.
Yes.
Like, it's a children's book.
I know.
But then
we're
it's just like the
overthinking.
metaphors are very mixed because she did reference early in the book, oh, like Sleeping Beauty. And she said, well, I don't have to go to sleep, sort of thing. So, like, there's already a concept of like a bad fairy coming and like wrecking your stuff because whatever and giving you this curse. But then Lucinda's like, la-di-da, I didn't think out that turning someone into a squirrel was a problem.
Oh my
What?
goodness. Oh, good grief.
I was totally fine suspending my disbelief for most of the fairy magic up until the point where reformed Lucinda and Mandy both refused to take off the obedience curse. Like, Lucinda has realized big magic is a problem. She has realized it is screwing up people's lives and refuses to actually take responsibility for it. She's like, oh, you're crying? I don't like looking at that. And literally like poofs off when she sees Ella having a hard time. It's at that point, like, clean up
Yeah.
your mess.
Agree. That made no sense to me either. Like, why is it huge magic to say, oh, do over? I messed that up.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think of is that if you're a child reading this, adults with motives you can't understand
Very
and
true.
deep context that you do not have is very relatable.
I do
That's a good
remember
point.
when reading it, like, just the frustration of that moment. I felt so strongly internally. Like, it was impactful while reading it. So
Yeah, I remember feeling frustrated in Ella's shoes. Like,
absolutely.
what do you mean I have to walk across
Tiny,
this room
tiny shoes.
perfectly and all this pain? And you guys have seen how bad this is. Why won't you get rid of this?
Mhm.
Yeah, I do want to talk about people seeing how bad things are and then they just kind of keep doing it. So the other thing, there's real issues with some of the treatment of non-human characters in
Yeah.
this book. And it sometimes seems to be acknowledged as like, oh, this is problematic, but then it just keeps going.
Yeah, the big one is definitely the zoo.
Yeah.
Which, if you haven't read the book, just hearing that there's a zoo for non-human creatures that are sentient like should raise a lot of red flags.
Oh yeah, an entire
Yeah.
forest of them.
Well, and even so the zoo, even beyond the zoo, there's just so many examples of what seem to be huge groups of non-humans being othered to the point that they've been like removed and like kept away from everyone
Yeah.
else.
And what's weird to me is it almost feels like an accessory instead of something integral to the plot because it's never commented on.
No, it's really not. I guess there's a little bit with the ogres so there's the point where Ella, who bizarrely is able to acquire entire languages in like a day if she's exposed to them, is captured by ogres. Ogres come upon her and she uses their own language to sort of manipulate them. And then the prince and his men come and like tie up the ogres to take them away and capture them. And there is a moment in that scene where Ella kind of feels sorry for them, but then it's immediately ended and it's never commented on again. And you get these references later in the book to like, great ogre catcher, or like, yeah, we caught so many ogres, like that it's a great thing. But we have this brief flash of sort of empathy for them that just immediately evaporates and just doesn't show up again.
It keeps happening. Wow, being a servant's bad. Anyway, wow.
Yes.
Yeah, she's like, wow, these people are treated terribly. That's
well.
crazy. Then she sees the ogres. Oh, wow, they're actually being oppressed and othered. And she's like, wow, that's crazy. Anyway, I have a dance to attend.
Yes.
They have put her in situations where she is like shown to be better than how a lot of people approach othered beings. Like when she is staying with the elves and they're like, your dad sucks. We hate trading with him. You're really nice. We'll give you these like expensive gifts that are like super rare. Or how, she's her friend at school gets like, bullied and teased by the other girls because she's not from their kingdom. But then there's like these huge systemic things that she just doesn't notice or doesn't engage with. I mean, she's also a child surrounded by adults that aren't engaging
16.
with it either. But 16 by the end. She's like 15 when her mom dies, I think.
Okay.
Well, then there's also at the end when she gets married, it says that she refused to be a princess.
That was interesting.
So it was like, okay, I assume this is like she's taking some sort of stand on principle, but then it didn't seem like she was. It was like she just refused the title to show that she didn't have to be obedient anymore. It didn't mean anything.
But since we're talking about like othered groups, can I just bring up a little pet peeve of mine? They're like, oh yeah, she learned languages really fast because she has a single drop of fairy blood. And as a mixed race person, that was a little, I had to like step back, put the book down, be like, all right, are we going to have, is this a blood quantum thing? Are we getting into weird racism in this book?
Yeah. And
did they actually say the languages had anything to do with the fairy blood? I don't remember that connection being made.
I thought it was that the fairy blood, the little bit of fairy blood made her predisposed to be special at certain things.
I was pretty sure that the
things.
fairy blood only came up to explain how she had tiny feet. I don't think it ever got into the languages.
I also
Maybe.
thought like
Yeah.
Marisa did that it meant that she had a little bit of magic in her.
I can double check actually.
The magic came in
Let
the
me
form
double
of
check, 'cause I could be
tiny
wrong,
feet.
too.
You
If
know,
you
I'm
have
If
more
it
almost,
is just the tiny feet, that's hilarious. But like she
you're
this
descendant.
is so inconsequential, but we have to bring it up to make the glass slippers make sense.
Okay.
But they also talked about, because Mandy also said your mom did too, like that you get this from your mom. And her mom throughout the book is also this same sort of character where it's like, she's not like the other ladies. Even the queen says that. Like, I used to have a friend that was free and wonderful and whatever. And she's like, I knew she was talking about my mom.
Yeah, there's
that's the only person in the kingdom that could
There's
be.
only allowed to be one nice woman in the court at all
Right.
times.
Only one.
Only one special, not like the other girls.
I just love I love the idea that you find out that you're a descendant of a group of people known for having profound power and the ability to affect their space. And then the only thing you get is small feet.
Yeah. And then I just also that just seems like such an elaborate thing to spin to just account for why her feet are smaller than
Just
the
say she has small
stepsister. Just say
feet.
she has small feet. She's described as tiny anyways.
Yeah, thank goodness she's not heavy, because those tiny feet she wouldn't be able to move.
If we're interested, Mandy does say that it doesn't give her any magic or longevity. It's just her feet.
So what's the point?
It really is just about the glass slippers then. But you could have just said she had small feet, because they've also described the stepsisters as being, in other ways physically much larger than her. Just say their feet are bigger.
It
He
wouldn't
only
even
tries
have
the
to-
shoes on 3 people.
It wouldn't even have to have anything to do with size, because the shoes don't come into the story until her and Char find them when they're hanging out in an abandoned castle. So he should just know that she's the only one that has them. We don't have to do the tiny feet thing.
Yeah, it's very odd. And it's not like this echoes the Cinderella story in which he tries them on every person in the kingdom. It's 3 people.
Yes. And he's already seen her face and recognizes her.
Yes.
It's like,
She has nothing to do with it.
Also, her alias is terrible.
Yeah.
what was it again?
Lella.
Lala?
And she's Ella to Lella.
Lala?
It's this is your name is Bobby and you go with Robbie as your alias. This is not a significant change to your name.
That is a name you make up when you think you're going to be in trouble for something. You get caught jaywalking or something. What's your name? Lala.
She was clearly not making plans on the coach ride over. That was on the spot, poor decision making.
At boarding school, I would get a refund.
The coach ride over is also another throwaway thing. I feel like there's a lot of things in this book where there were more pages that got edited out and things were important. And then we just don't see how that plays out. And they forgot to edit the whole thing out, because the coach being a pumpkin. So she has an orange coach. And she's like, well, that's just what we have in Bast. They're just orange in Bast, this other part of the kingdom where apparently the prince has never been. But then the queen says, I don't remember there being orange coaches in Bast. And that's it. Nothing happens because of that. There's no epiphany oh, this girl is not who she says she is. She's not really. There's nothing.
She's
It's
just very fashionable.
a throwaway line.
Again, though,
wonder
reading this
why.
as a kid,
You don't know.
it just seemed like a little joke. I wasn't reading
Yeah.
that much into it. I was enjoying the queen being I didn't read that much into it. I
It
just
seems like
enjoyed
the
it.
queen always has an insight, and then nothing is commented
Nothing.
on. I remember this wonderful woman,
Just
great
like
friend
you.
of mine, just like you. Man, that's weird.
Yeah.
I will say, on my reread, I'm here with you on all this, but when I was just reading it this past couple weeks, I was not reading it very harshly. I was pulled right back in, thoroughly
Mhm.
enjoying it. Reading the part at the end where she breaks the curse, this time, I think if I'd read it first as an adult, I would have thought it was kind of weak, honestly, the way that happened. But reading it as a kid, it felt huge.
Yes!
Every single sentence I was feeling inside me, and when it finally breaks and he breaks the curse, so much just warmth and joy and epiphany kind of feelings, and it was a really good experience as a kid.
You
I-
have
yeah.
agency.
Yeah,
I totally get that. I mean, what we read is so tied to when it's very rooted in the experience we had when we first read something,
absolutely.
Yes.
whether it's bad or good. And it's really hard, I think, to really get that distance from it ever, because it's a full reading a book when you're a kid, especially, is a full sensory thing.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
so I 100% get that. And I feel like I'm being kind of a downer about this book just because I've only read it as an adult. And I will be honest, I don't recall when I read this at first thinking like, what is this? Or being like bothered by things. So some of it too, I just think is we're reading it with a different lens because we're trying to break it down. But when she breaks the curse, okay, so it really bothered me because the take home seemed to be like, well, a good man is what you really need. Because that was what what caused
so
her
much
to
bigger
do it.
than
It was
him,
like her
though.
love for herself, her love for Mandy, her love for her family wasn't enough. But man, her love for that one good man, it pushed her through.
I felt like it was so much bigger than him because it wasn't just him. It was the whole kingdom. It was anyone she married, someone could kill. But
selfless. But I just also, I don't know.
I do have to say that when I first read it as a kid, and I see that her evil stepmother, Olga, which again, evil name, and her stepsisters are like, yes, marry him. This is going to be perfect. Love this. We're getting money. We're getting cakes every day. This is going to be awesome. You can sit there and be trash, but this is excellent for us. And when she says no, I remember just my jaw dropping as a kid. Like, I think it's because when you're a little kid, especially, if I ever told an adult in my life no when I was 10, oh my, I couldn't do it. I would be sent to my room.
And also, like, she's not just saying no to them, which is a huge part of it. She's also saying no to herself, which I think what sets it apart from the other moments where she was forced to do stuff she doesn't want to. She wants to be with him. And if the rest of her family benefits from it, whatever. But it's something she deeply wants. So the internal struggle that's different from the other times, what sets this apart from the other times she's been in that kind of struggle is that she has to say, there's already an internal struggle that's way bigger than the other times. Like she knows that she cannot give into what she wants or what other people are telling her to do. She's fighting herself and them.
I know, but it's still about him. So I pulled up the page and this is what bothered me.
All right.
So when she has this breakthrough, she says, where there was room for only one truth, I must save Shar. And then she goes on about like, I found a power that I hadn't had before. I hadn't been able to find it for a lesser cause, and I found my voice. It feels so rooted to him. Oh,
patriarchy.
Yeah.
Just to add with that, you're not wrong, but just to add to that, I gotta find it.
I mean, I get it. It's love.
Here we go.
It's supposed
Saving
to be love.
him made him more mine than ever. I don't know. I feel like here you go. I don't love that.
My safety from the ogres hadn't been enough. The rescue hadn't been enough. All these things hadn't been enough. Kyria was enough. The country comes first. And then Shar was enough. You're not wrong, but it's bigger too.
So literally the moral of the story is king and country.
Okay, so
ouch.
Yeah, I don't love that we get repeatedly in that chapter, I'm not enough.
That is true. I'm not gonna argue with that.
To me is a really problematic message to give girls.
That's true.
Because everything in our society tells us I'm not enough.
And that you have to accommodate.
Yes, we put so much on girls from birth to do for others, obligation, responsibility,
obedience,
and lose yourself in the process. It's not about you. You should be selfless and all of these things. And I feel like this is just very much ending on that note. Like, what's really good for you is you're not enough. It's for other people. And that being a man too is also very to me. But that feels regressive. Like, what are we doing different than a fairy tale here? We're giving the same take home where it is all about the prince.
Yeah.
I do want to say that I agree with you. I'm not going to argue with that at all. Like, and it makes me think about how the new and progressive messages we were telling young girls have evolved. Like when I was a kid reading this book, the not like other girls thing felt as if it was the empowering thing to hear, because it wasn't just like the girls around me. It was like we're telling you that the princess of this story doesn't have to be perfectly poised and blonde and all these things that had been, the trope for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And so that felt like an important thing to emphasize. And now looking at it, it's like, let's not set up girls as each other's enemies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now we read it and say, like, we see the bigger problems, but reading it as a little girl in the context of 20 years ago, it still felt like I was getting something empowering from it, even though there was further it could have gone
and that's
more I could have
important.
learned.
But then I think for the how does it hold up now?
Exactly.
Would we recommend it with that in mind? And I'm maybe. I wouldn't say I wouldn't let a child read Grimm's fairy tales. I think I'll let a kid read whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like this is a book I would want to deconstruct with a kid afterwards and just be like, what did you get out of this?
Oh,
Because I do feel like the message at the end of the day isn't what I want. And if the child is taking it as a fairy tale, nobody reads Grimm's and thinks oh, well, this is what I want for myself, I guess, at this point. It's certainly not a child that's at the age to read this. I mean, maybe a 5-year-old does. I want to be the princess at the ball. But because this is a little bit more sophisticated and it's a little bit modernized, does the child still walk away with what I really want for myself is to find a man that loves me enough that I can do whatever he needs me to be?
Yeah.
Which I don't love.
Yeah. I mean, there's also a part of me that still goes back to the idea that this is more of the idea of being in this world and reacting to it. Because I remember as a kid, a lot of the older people, like the teenagers and a lot of other girls and a lot of women that I knew, it seemed like they could do everything perfectly. I never saw them make a mistake. And I think a lot of that is how we are socialized, that if we do make a mistake, no one can ever know about it, ever. And so for me, seeing that this character who is a good person, who is really nice, struggle with stuff and have to have, bloody hands from wiping the floors. And there was something about that was, at least for 10-year-old me, kind of empowering. Here is somebody who makes mistakes. But on this side of 25 years after the book was first released, I kind of sit there and go, I don't know about that.
Certainly with a lot of the books that we've picked to cover for this, which we've picked based on folks saying, hey, this book was important to me as a child, have that sort of heroine in them. They have the heroine who's not perfect and she's maybe a tomboy or she gets into scrapes or she makes a mess and then has to fix it. And I think that there's something really important there about how many of us really wanted that as children. We wanted a character, and that, we talk about representation a lot, and having a flawed heroine on some level looked like us to a great diversity of us who were reading these books as kids.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful. I just don't know that this, for me, holds up in the same way that some of the other books have, just because of how it sticks the landing at the end is a little bit,
I can agree
the bow
with you
she
on
ties
that,
it up
yeah.
in is a little bit problematic to me reading it now. But again, that's reading it as an adult, and I don't have the tie to this book as a child that you all did. So I can't backwards look at what would I have taken from it at the time.
Yeah.
But I do think there's real validity to saying it's important for us to have heroines that are real people, that they have issues and struggles and problems, and they aren't just perfect and they do everything right the first time. And
yeah, I agree with you. And thinking about, I felt similarly that there's books that are written now for girls now are gonna be able to cover the things that the girls now need in a way that this book can't.
Yeah. Books are always a product of the context that they were created in. So obviously 2022 is going to look a whole lot different than 1997. But I think for me personally, would I recommend it now? I feel like it would be a yes with 5 asterisks with a warning of don't think too much about it, because the issue really is, if you're a little kid, it's fun.
Mhm.
When you're an adult, you're sitting here going, oh my God, no.
Well, and so that also brings up that this was a Newbery book. We've read some other Newbery books, and of the Newbery books that we've read, it's been a real mixed bag in terms of how well they've held up. And I think of this one sort of in contrast to something like The Westing Game, which I would absolutely recommend now, even though it's even older than this book. Whereas this one I'm more on the fence about because I'm just not sure it's as well done. There's not enough, if the message isn't right. So in a lot of these books, the message is so good that you can kind of be like, I can overlook some of the flaws in this. This one, the message doesn't quite land for me. And I'm not sure this is like great literature in and of itself if you take the message out of it. Like, I don't know that the writing is fantastic in this. It is very generic. I think we've used that word a lot of times. There's a lot of books doing similar things to this. To me, this one doesn't jump out as like, oh, this did it better than the other ones in this class of books.
I think I'd honestly recommend some of the same author's other books, maybe before this one. Like the Two Princesses of Bamar stands out a lot. I haven't read it super recently, but I remember the ending like totally throwing me off and blowing my little mind about what a happy ending or not so happy ending could look like. So like the author can do good things and really creative things, but and I don't think this is like a bad example of her writing, but if you're going to pick one out, maybe this isn't the strongest.
I'm going to make a very, very, very bad joke. It was like she was trying to shove a foot into a shoe that was too small.
Yeah.
Nice.
I saw it. I went for it. I apologize.
No, that's fair. We can always go with an apt metaphor or pun in this space.
For me, my personal summary for it, I wouldn't say that it fell flat for me. I still really enjoyed rereading it, and I still enjoyed Ella as a character for all of her blind spots. There's a lot of other books in this genre out there now that are more connected to what we want in this day and age. So I'll keep it on my own shelf, but maybe not pass it around a whole lot.
It was foreshadowing Shrek. I'm sorry.
Which speaking of, Teresa mentioned that the movie version of this
briefly
was,
talk about the movie,
the Shrekifying of Ella. So I would like you to comment on that, Teresa.
Oh my
Shrekification arc. Go.
So I'm going to start by saying they were trying to be Shrek while missing what Shrek did well. So I don't mean to slander Shrek.
There will be no Shrek slander.
While making the movie, they must have decided that it just wasn't going to appeal to kids enough, which I think means that they didn't understand what the book had that was good about it. So they made some really bad changes. Like the book, the magic fairy book that she has is, well, let me start with Mandy isn't like her fairy godmother with limited magic or who puts limits on her own magic. She's just a fairy that sucks at being a fairy. And so the magic fairy book is her boyfriend that she accidentally turned into a book. So there is like a magic mirror style face on the front of this fairy book that talks throughout the whole thing. It's absolutely
creepy,
painful to watch. It's horrible. And then we talked a little bit about how we didn't feel like the treatment of other like humanoid species was great. The movie, they try to act like they're more aware of it by having Ella like protest the treatment of ogres, but then the actual movie portrayal of ogres and elves is horrendous. Like they're just bumbling buffoons. The elves are like legally only allowed to be entertainers, which is presented in the movie as a very bad thing, obviously. But then the actual elves, like that is literally all they are in the movie at the same time. It's Ella and Char only know each other for like 3 days. There's not like a friendship that starts when they're kids. It's very, very bad.
I full disclosure, I have not watched the film. I did do a really quick cursory search. I'd like to say, number one, it came out in 2004. So that's relatively removed from when this book was really popular. So I feel like it was a case of, oh, we got the rights for this.
Yeah.
All right, let's, okay, princesses. Anne Hathaway, Hey, yeah, come over here.
Who is not at her best in this movie.
Well, I find that really strange casting just out of the gate. And I haven't seen this movie in a long time. But Anne Hathaway, for me, does not at all work for the Ella that was in the book.
And she doesn't feel like she's acting naturally as an Anne Hathaway version of the character either. It feels like she's trying to like make herself smaller and like sweet and little in a way that feels really unnerving, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
The way her curse is treated is my main bone to pick with the movie. They turn it into a gag.
Yeah.
Like I'd really like in the book that like whenever she has to obey something, it's like a physical struggle. And she's able to resist to a point. And that's an important part of how she maintains any smidgen of agency for herself. And in the movie, it's just like a magic snap your fingers. She like turns into a robot and just does it. And half the time it's just for laughs too.
Oh my gosh.
It's, yeah, like I said, just completely disrespectful of the source material and what it brought.
Hathaway commented apparently that she prefers the way the movie turned out to the book because it quote, makes fun of itself for being a fairy tale.
And that's what I mean. Like they were trying to make it Shrek.
That kind of erases any message that the book was trying to send anyways, if you do it as a humorous, because that's not meant to be funny.
Yeah,
it's
it's torture. Like her experience.
That is a terrible curse to have to just obey and you don't have your own agency. And I do think the book does a really good job of depicting that. Like all of the stupid stuff that Hattie makes her do, you really see how traumatic that would be to lose your voice and your agency in that way. So to play that for laughs is a choice.
And I really liked her boarding school experience in the book for that like she has to obey all the petty little commands about her posture and her stitches and the volume of her voice and everything, but none of it comes naturally either. So she's constantly having to like police every movement that she makes or else be like fully nauseous every second of the day. Like that's torture.
Yeah. And I don't like the idea of making fun of that because I think part of the appeal of the original book is that it does make it very vivid of like the effects of this sort of thing. Like, do this, do that. And as a little kid reading this, I already don't have a lot of agency. The only thing I really can do is where I walk. And even then there are limits. So it was really scary for me to read. So I can't help but ask Miss Hathaway, what was you thought this was an improvement? Okay, that is a decision.
And it doesn't sound like the author agreed with that either.
Each episode, we are heading into the library and talking to you. Well, not you, but people like you right here in the stacks. Today, we want to know, if you were at the royal ball, what faux pas would you commit that would give away that you are really not royalty?
Not wearing a dress because I don't want to wear one.
I'd probably not want to blow my cover, but that's the reason I'm gonna blow my cover. I'll probably talk in a British accent or something and they'll kick me out.
Probably the way I dress. I think I might try to be over the top, and I might dress too fancy, I guess you could say.
I feel it would be the dance because I'll be messing up in the dance.
For me, I would say feeling like if I'm a fall or trip and I don't know how to dance. Yeah, basically.
What can I get? Yeah. I would trip. 100% trip.
Blow my cover at a royal ball. I don't know. I feel like I would say the wrong thing or something like that and then just completely embarrass myself, I guess.
The mistake that I would make is probably that I'd be a little bit too crazy for royalty. Same here.
I think I would forget to put on a crown or jewelry because that's the most important thing. Because when you have a crown, that's when you know that they're actually a princess. But I think I would forget to put it on because I'm very forgetful.
probably not address the people by the right way, like not say ma'am or or your highness or something. I might forget to do something like that.
Not dancing correctly.
So today we are going to play a little game designed by Hannah called Would You Pass Finishing School? I will give the scenarios to the two of you and you will answer and we will determine whether you will pass finishing school.
Right. Oh dear.
In Ella's world, I suppose.
I'm finished school. I did 6 years.
You are at the palace of the king and somehow, you don't know how, you have found yourself walking and talking with the king. You know that your position in space matters greatly in court etiquette, and you need to stand or move in the correct place near the king to show respect. Where do you place yourself in relation to the king? A, behind him to show yourself as a lower social position, even though it will make carrying on a conversation hard. B, to the right of him to show that you are, at the moment, his right-hand woman. Or C, to his left, because placing a monarch on your right shows proper deference and places him in the position of honor.
I'm guessing C.
I'm guessing C based only on what I know about chess. No, like the placement of the pieces. Unrelated to any of this. When you said the king, I immediately thought of Charles III because that's what we're calling him now. The monarch formerly known as Prince.
So strange.
Yeah, it still feels weird. And I'm like, do I want to talk to this man? No. I don't.
Behind him, far, far, far behind him.
Can I pick D? Nowhere near me.
So the correct answer,
we're not executed yet.
The correct answer is to place the monarch on your right. All right.
Great.
Number 2, you're at a fancy banquet and the soup course was just placed in front of you. You delicately take a sip from your soup spoon, proud that you have managed not to slurp, and you selected the correct utensil. However, the swallow of soup you now have in your mouth has the unmistakable presence of a hair. How do you get it out of your mouth without being rude?
You swallow it or die.
We learned this. We've learned from Ella's mom, you're just drinking that hair. A, excuse yourself with a mouthful of soup to try to find the bathroom. B, spit it onto the edge of the plate. Or C, carefully deposit it into your napkin, hoping the liquid doesn't get everywhere.
Napkin.
I feel like it's C.
So it is to discreetly deposit it into your napkin.
Yes. We're not dead yet.
Which importantly should be folded with the crease towards you so that the outer facing corner can be used to dab around the mouth.
Oh,
important to know. You need to visit the ladies' room, but to your dismay, the dinner shows no sign of stopping. Do you A, tap your glass with your fork and politely ask permission to visit the bathroom?
For sure that one.
B, leave quietly and discreetly without saying anything to anyone. Or C, announce loudly to your dinner companions in your vicinity so that at least someone knows you're coming back and not to clear your plate.
Oh, I don't know.
I think it's B, because isn't there a way to arrange your silverware so that it says I'm coming back?
Yeah, like you cross them.
Yeah, and to not remove your plate. Yeah. I'm going to definitively say B is the correct answer here. All right. I think that Teresa and Marisa are both ladies who would pass finishing school in Kyria.
But we didn't even get to posture or stitching or dancing.
No, you didn't dance on your tiny feet at all.
Each episode, we ask whether our book passes the Bechdel test. The Bechdel test asks whether a work features two female characters who talk to each other about something that doesn't involve men or boys. So, does Ella Enchanted pass?
Yes.
For sure.
Plenty of conversations between the women in this book. Mandy and Ella have a jillion conversations.
Mm-hmm.
She has conversations with her friends at her friend, singular, at finishing school, and her frenemies at finishing school. So yeah, there's plenty there.
Unfortunate acquaintances.
Well, that's it for this episode of These Books Made Me. Join us next time when we'll discuss a book in which somebody's uncle is writing them a whole lot of letters. If you think you know which book we're tackling next, drop us a tweet. We are at PGCMLS on Twitter and hashtag These Books Made Me.